The police showed up at my doorstep in the middle of the night, ready to arrest me for trespassing on my own property. Apparently, the HOA's self-appointed queen, Karen-in-Chief Diana Foster, had dialed 911 and claimed I was endangering the community simply by staying at my family's lake cabin. The officer looked almost as bewildered as I felt. "Sir, we received a report stating you're unlawfully occupying this residence." I nearly laughed. Diana really thought she could scare me off with bogus police reports and phony legal threats. But what she didn't realize, my family doesn't just own this cabina, we own something far more powerful, something that's about to unravel every thread of her little empire. Welcome to Anna Dramanest. Viewers, tell me in the comments where you're watching from because this is about to get wild. Let me rewind a bit and explain how we got here. My name's Alex Kane. I'm 45 years old, recently retired from a long career as a corporate attorney specializing in property fraud. And yes, I know this probably already sounds like a story where the lawyer gets the last laugh, but trust me, it gets way messier. 2 years ago, my father passed away and left me our family cabin up at Clearwater Lake. Between handling his estate and closing down my practice in the city, I hadn't gotten around to visiting the cabin until now. And that, it turns out, was a big mistake, because while I was gone, someone had been busy transforming our peaceful lakeside community into a personal ATM. So, I finally pull up to the cabin where I spent every summer as a kid, ready for some well-earned quiet time and nostalgic comfort. Everything looked just like I remember it at the lake. The tall evergreens, that cool, crisp air that clears your head better than therapy. I'd barely started unpacking when she showed up, how like she'd been waiting and watching for my arrival. Imagine a woman with picture-perfect blonde hair, a designer business outfit that probably costs more than most people's mortgage, and a smile just a little too polished to be sincere. "Welcome back to the community," she chirped. "I'm Diana Foster, president of the Clearwater Lake Homeowners Association." She held a thick folder like she was about to slap me with a lawsuit. "You must be Alex Kane. So sorry about your father, but you'll need to register with the HOA within 24 hours. It's a mandatory community regulation." Now, I've dealt with enough con artists and manipulators in my career to spot one on sight, and this woman was practically glowing red with warning signs. Still, I decided to play along to see where she was going with all this. "Of course, Diana," I said. "What do I need to do?" That's when she unleashed a laundry list of so-called violations, and most of which were complete nonsense. Apparently, my father had been fined for docking the boat incorrectly. Then there was the issue of the cabin's exterior paint color not meeting the HOA's visual cohesion standards. Oh, and let's not forget the backdated marina fees she claimed I owed. But here's where it got creepy. Diana knew way too much about me. She brought up my father's passing, referenced my job in the city, and even asked about my long-term intentions for the property. Neighbors don't ask those kinds of questions. Bank loan officers do. Still, I kept my expression neutral. "Thanks, Diana. I'll take a look at everything and get back to you." The flicker of annoyance on her face when I didn't push back, that was all the confirmation I needed that this wasn't about community rules. She had another agenda. After she left, I went to speak to my neighbors. And every small town has that one person who knows everyone's business. Here, it was Eleonora Sweet, 70, and sharp as a tack. She'd lived next door to our cabin for decades. But when I mentioned Diana's name, Eleanor's entire demeanor shifted. She glanced around nervously, then leaned in like she was about to share a national secret. "Alex, honey," she whispered, "you need to be real careful with that woman. She's pushed out 6 families already." Same story every time. The fines, the fees, the violations that just kept coming. Eventually, they gave up and sold for way less than market value. The Wilsons, they sold for 60% just to escape it all. Eleanor explained how Diana had popped up about 3 years ago, somehow secured the HOA presidency, and immediately began enforcing all these new, never-before-heard rules. That night, I got to work. I cracked open my laptop and did what I do best to dig. First stop, county property records. I searched Diana Foster's name. Nothing. No property ownership. No voting records. No taxes paid before 2020. It was like she didn't exist before 3 years ago. But things got even more suspicious. I found 6 lakefront properties that had recently been sold to the same buyer, a company named Lakeside Properties LLC. Every single one of those homes belonged to families Eleanor had mentioned, and every sale was for way below market value. And each one listed unresolvable HOA disputes as the reason for selling. I traced Lakeside Properties LLC to a law firm and a P.O. box. Standard stuff. But I dug deeper and found its parent company, Sapphire Development Corporation. Now that name, that one rang alarms. Turns out, Sapphire Development is a huge player in the resort real estate game, and they'd already filed preliminary documents with the county for a $50 million luxury resort development project, a Broken Bar covering the entire Clearwater Lake region. Suddenly, everything fit. This wasn't about neighborhood guidelines or improving the community. It was a land grab. And Diana, she was the smiling puppet pulling strings for the real players behind the curtain. But here's the part that's even stranger. I uncovered 6 lakefront properties, every single one purchased by the same mysterious LLC in just the last 2 years. That meant Diana had been systematically driving people out, one by one, to clear the path for this massive development scheme. So who exactly is Diana Foster, and why is there no record of her existence prior to 3 years ago? The numbers made the motive crystal clear. There are a total of 8 lakefront properties around Clearwater. For Sapphire Development to legally proceed with their resort, they need control of at least 80% of the land. Right now, they've got 6 homes. That's 75%. And guess what? My cabin makes up the missing 15%. At the tipping point they desperately need to hit the threshold. The final piece, a small lot owned by an elderly couple who rarely show up, would just be icing on the cake. By now, I knew this was no coincidence. Let me know in the comments. So have you ever had a neighbor who seemed just a little too polished to be genuine? The following morning, I dove back into the rabbit hole. I combed through business filings, land records, and county permit documents for hours, and what I uncovered was beyond anything I expected. Turns out, Sapphire Development had filed their initial plans for the Clearwater Lake Luxury Resort a year and a half ago, right around the same time the first families mysteriously started selling their homes. The timeline was too clean to be chance. It was a calculated, step-by-step plan to gain majority ownership. But what really grabbed my attention was this. They didn't need all 8 properties to just 80%. That meant they were 1 property short. Mine. They'd secured 6 homes already. If they got mine, they'd be at 90%, with the elderly couple's place just a bonus. I was still absorbing this bombshell when Diana returned, this time with backup. She brought a full entourage. A land surveyor who claimed he needed to verify boundaries, a marina inspector poking around my boat for safety compliance, and, of course, an HOA attorney with a briefcase full of intimidating documents. This wasn't a neighborly visit anymore, it was a coordinated squeeze play. Diana didn't waste time. Mr. Kane, she began with that condescending tone, it seems there's been some confusion about how our community operates. We have strict standards, and frankly, your property has been a Broken Bar problematic for quite a while now. She lingered on that word problematic like it was a personal insult. Then came the real punch. She handed me a purchase offer, already filled out and signed, from Lakeside Properties LLC. The offer, $400,000, for a property worth, at minimum, $650,000, probably more. I've gone ahead and arranged a meeting with a company that acquires lakefront properties at fair market value, she said with a fake sweetness that nearly made me gag. You should really consider this generous proposal. It would prevent a lot of unnecessary tension. Translation: take the deal, or we'll ruin you. I didn't say anything right away, and that's when the real Diana started to surface. Her expression hardened. Look, Alex, I've been patient, but this neighborhood doesn't take kindly to resistance. You can sell voluntarily or we'll make your life very, very unpleasant. She launched into her laundry list of threats. The HOA has broad enforcement powers, she said. We can fine you. We can file liens against your cabin. We can drag you through legal hell. And those legal fees? They add up fast. Trust me, it's far cheaper to just walk away now and avoid the headache. I met her stare head on and calmly asked, "And if I don't, what exactly are you going to do?" That's when she fully dropped the act. The HOA has the right to impose fines up to $50,000 for repeated violations, she snapped. "We can legally seize your property if you refuse to comply. We'll take you to court, tie you up in litigation for years if we have to. Your peace of mind, your money, it'll all disappear. So do yourself a favor, Alex. Don't push us." I paused, like I was actually considering it. Then I gave her a measured smile and said, "Let me sleep on it. Can I give you an answer tomorrow?" Her whole posture relaxed, like she thought she'd finally worn me down. "Of course," she said sweetly. "I'm sure you'll make the smart choice." But the second she walked away, I made a call, not to a real estate agent, to a private investigator I used to work with back in my legal days. I called up Mike, a seasoned private investigator I used to collaborate with during my law career. "Mike, I need a deep dive on someone calling herself Diana Foster. I don't think that's her real name. I'm sending you her photo and everything else I've managed to dig up so far." While waiting for Mike to get back to me, I kept poking around on my own, and what I uncovered next made my stomach turn. Buried in the County Planning Commission records was the official construction timeline for Sapphire Development's resort. Groundbreaking was already scheduled to begin in 6 months. Even more alarming, according to attached financing documents, Diana had already accepted advance funds from Sapphire to secure the last 2 remaining properties. Which meant that if this deal collapsed, she wouldn't just lose her grip, as she'd owe Sapphire a large sum back, plus penalty interest. Now her growing desperation made perfect sense. But what unsettled me even more than her panic was her unwavering confidence, like she still believed she had the upper hand. That kind of cocky assurance only comes from people with powerful protection, the kind who can erase legal issues, silence dissent, and crush obstacles quietly. In my years practicing law, I'd learned a simple truth. People don't act like that unless they're backed by something a lot bigger than themselves. Diana kept vaguely referencing they or those people, but never said who they were. It was clear now this woman wasn't acting alone. Then, Mike called me back, and what he told me confirmed my worst suspicion. "Alex," he said, "your Diana Foster is actually Rebecca Walsh. She's wanted in Colorado for running a nearly identical scam 3 years ago. Same pattern as she tricked a homeowners association into thinking she represented a development group, collected funds for fake upgrades, then disappeared once it all crumbled. There's still a warrant out for her arrest." Suddenly, it all came together. Diana Rebecca wasn't just an overly aggressive HOA president. She was a full-blown grifter, a con artist who specialized in large-scale real estate fraud. She had probably blown through the advance from Sapphire already and now found herself cornered by suspicious homeowners on one side and angry corporate investors on the other. The next morning, she showed up at my door again, looking far more rattled than usual. "Alex, I need your answer today," she snapped. "The offer won't stay open much longer." There was no more pretense, just raw desperation. But instead of giving her a direct response, I decided to poke the bear. "Diana," I said casually, "I've been going over your HOA authority claims, and I'm curious. Could you show me the original community documents that give you the right to collect marina fees?" She began shuffling through her stack of papers, clearly trying to stall. "Well, yes, of course it's all documented somewhere. These were all passed by a community vote, naturally. But when I asked for specific records of voting results, meeting minutes, any legal justification," as she started unraveling, her polished act cracked, and then she completely lost it. "You don't get it," she shouted. "I already spent the advance. If this deal dies, I'm finished. These people will bury me if I don't deliver what I promised." Right there, that was the moment. She'd just confessed to fraud, to misappropriating funds, and to being under pressure from people who likely didn't solve problems with legal notices. I stayed calm. "I'll think about it," I said. "Give me a little more time." But inside, I was already several moves ahead. This woman had driven 6 families from their homes through threats and manipulation. Now, she was trying the same play on me. Well, she picked the wrong person to con. She stormed off, screaming about calling someone who would take care of this permanently. I just smirked, pulled out my phone, and dialed Mike again, because what Diana didn't know was Thiza was already ahead of her game, way ahead. And when you've spent your career taking down fraudsters, you never walk into a fight without leverage. Anna Dramenest Familia drop a comment below. What do you think I uncovered that made me so sure of myself? 2 days later, Diana clearly scrambling called for an emergency home meeting. The topic, so-called community safety concerns. She invited all 8 property owners, including the 6 homes now owned by Lakeside Properties LLC, for one goal, to vote me out. I was honestly curious just how far she was willing to take this circus, so I showed up. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse which, ironically enough, sat on land I was about to prove belonged to me. Diana had gone all in. She had printed visual displays of community standards, stacks of photos showing my supposed violations, and of course, the same lawyer from before posturing in a suit like this was a courtroom drama. But what really stood out, some of the attendees were clearly not genuine homeowners. They were paid actors there to play the part of concerned citizens ready to testify that I was a menace. It was a sham. The audience included Diana and her 6 Lakeside proxies pretending to be concerned property owners, Eleanor, who looked nervous but stayed by my side, the Coopers, an elderly couple too scared to speak up, and Thomas Martinez, the local handyman caught in the middle, clearly uncomfortable with how hostile everything had become. From the moment the meeting began, it was obvious Diana had choreographed the whole thing like a courtroom scene where she was both prosecutor and judge. Her presentation was slick, intended to paint me as the villain. She had pictures of my boat docked improperly, even though it was tied up to my own pier. Fake complaints from anonymous neighbors. Allegations that I'd been harassing residents by simply asking about the HOA's legal standing. And some cooked-up financial charts that supposedly proved my behavior was crashing the community's property values. She wrapped up with a dramatic performance. This community has worked too hard to create something special, she declared. We cannot allow one individual's selfishness to destroy it. The well-being of our families depends on unity and cooperation. Her lawyer then chimed in, adding legal firepower to the intimidation campaign. The HOA reserves full authority to enforce rules and initiate penalties. We are prepared to escalate matters. Diana's lawyer stood up with fake confidence and launched into his scripted speech. HOA guidelines give us the power to enforce community standards through monetary penalties, liens, and legal escalation. Mr. Kane has repeatedly violated clearly documented rules, despite receiving multiple warnings. A community vote can authorize any enforcement necessary to protect the integrity and peace of our neighborhood. Then came the lineup of so-called witnesses. One by one, unfamiliar faces stood up, delivering dramatic stories about how I had allegedly threatened them, disturbed their lives, and generally made the lake community unbearable. It felt like I was watching a second-rate courtroom reality show, except this wasn't fiction. These people were attempting to rob me of my land by dressing up fraud as civic duty. I didn't flinch. I sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, letting Diana build her quasi layer by manipulative layer. I watched her sway the crowd, noticed the skeptical glances I began receiving from neighbors, even from the ones who had seemed neutral before. She had crafted such a tight web of lies that some folks were genuinely beginning to believe her, and that's exactly what I needed. The more she postured, the higher she climbed. And when someone climbs that high on lies, the fall is always devastating. Sweet Eleanor tried to speak up in my defense. God bless her, but she was shouted down by Diana's circle of planted cronies. You're missing the big picture, Eleanor, one of them snapped. This isn't just about neighborly disagreements. This is about the safety, stability, and financial future of everyone in our community. Even the fence-sitters started leaning Diana's way. Perfect. I needed the room to think she was in control. Then I stood up, calm, steady. I have a few administrative questions that need clarification before we move on to voting, I said, walking toward the front of the room. Diana's eyes narrowed. She didn't like being interrupted, but she boxed herself in by insisting this meeting follow proper procedure. She forced a smile. Of course, Alex. Though I can't imagine what could be unclear about your violations. I pulled out a plain manila folder and placed it on the table in front of me with deliberate precision. Oh, nothing much, just a few legal details. I flipped it open. For example, who gave the HOA the authority to collect fees for marina usage? Diana jumped right into her pre-planned answer, talking about community votes and procedures. But I cut her off. No, not procedural votes. I'm asking about legal ownership. What gives the HOA the right to control the marina in the first place? That's when her lawyer chimed in, tossing around vague legal jargon about HOA jurisdiction and shared spaces. Interesting, I said, nodding. And who exactly decided the marina was a shared space? Where's the deed that designates it as common property? Now Diana was squirming. Her answers became shaky. It's always been a community area, Alex. Everyone knows that. I pressed harder. Then surely you have the original property survey showing where the marina boundaries are, and maybe maintenance records, proof of who's been paying the taxes on that land? She had nothing. You could see her lawyer whispering in her ear, probably trying to advise her to shut the meeting down. But Diana's ego had taken the wheel. She thought I was bluffing. That was her fatal error. What she didn't know was that the night before, I had pulled a few all-nighters and driven out to the county recorder's office myself. The power of public records is underestimated until they turn a con into a confession. I could see Diana's allies shifting in their seats. Even the actor she hired looked confused, probably wondering why they were being asked for documents they'd never heard of. The elderly Coopers were whispering, starting to realize they'd been taken advantage of. Thomas Martinez, the local handyman, was scribbling notes like he didn't want to be anywhere near this mess when it exploded. Only Eleanor looked relaxed. Her nods told me she had waited years to see someone finally corner Diana. I cleared my throat and calmly addressed the room. Thank you all for being here tonight. Before any votes are cast, there's a critical legal issue we must address. Then I laid it all out. One by one, I spread certified property deeds, boundary maps, and tax records across the table, each one legally verified and time-stamped by the county. I didn't need drama. The truth was enough. Diana, I said evenly, you've been charging residents for marina access since my father passed away. But there's a problem. The HOA doesn't own the marina. Silence. I waited a beat, letting the gravity hit. My family estate owns the entire lakefront. I continued. That includes the marina, the clubhouse we're sitting in, and the so-called common areas you've been managing and profiting from. I stepped back and let the room take it in. For a moment, the only sound was the humming of the air conditioning. Then Eleanor gasped. I knew something was off. She whispered. Mr. Cooper looked confused. We've been paying fees to use his land? Diana's fake supporters shrank into their chairs. Her lawyer was flipping through my documents, desperate to poke a hole in them, but they were airtight. Then Diana snapped. This is nonsense. These documents must be fake. She was spiraling, but I was ready. They're certified copies from the county recorder's office, I said coolly, holding up the official seals. Here are the reference numbers if anyone wants to call and verify. Diana was shaking now, hyperventilating. You don't get it, she shrieked. This ruins everything. I've already spent this is harassment. She stopped herself just short of confessing outright, but she didn't need to say it. The room already knew, and this was just the beginning. A broken bar spending money that wasn't hers. But the damage had already been done. The entire community now realized they'd been paying fees for access to my land while Diana was pocketing the money under false authority. The room erupted into chaos. Diana was visibly unraveling, gasping for air, her lawyer frantically rifling through papers, and the crowd shouting in confusion and outrage. And me, I sat there completely calm, like I'd been preparing for this exact moment all my life. Because the truth is, a broken bar I had been. There's something else Diana never knew about the history of my family's estate, a detail that would utterly shatter her dreams of turning the lake into a resort, even if she somehow managed to acquire every surrounding lot. What secret was I still keeping? Let's just say a broken bar. My great-grandfather had the foresight to protect this land in a way that would outlive him by generations. Comment below what you think was Diana's biggest misstep, trusting the wrong people or targeting the wrong property. After the total disaster of that meeting, Diana apparently spiraled into full panic mode. I didn't even have to guess. Eleanor called me early the next morning, saying she saw Diana pacing outside her cabin until nearly 3 a.m., ranting into her phone and waving her arms at nothing. It made sense. The woman's entire financial future hinged on that resort deal, and I had just publicly destroyed the foundation she built it on. So what does someone like Diana do when she's cornered? She doubles down a broken bar on stupidity. At exactly 3:07 a.m., my phone jolted me awake with that sharp, alarming ring that makes your heart race. I let it buzz a few times before answering and sure enough, it was Diana. Her voice cracked with hysteria. "Alex, this is your final warning," she shrieked. "Pack up and leave the property immediately or I am calling the police. You're trespassing on community land and endangering residents." I couldn't help it. I literally laughed out loud. She was threatening to call the police. A broken bar to remove me. Broken bar from my own house, on my own land. "Diana," I said with a tired but amused tone, "it's 3 in the morning. Are you okay?" She wasn't. "Don't test me. I know people who can make problems like you disappear. This is your last chance." 20 minutes later, I heard sirens. She'd actually called 911 and fabricated a full-blown emergency. 2 officers showed up at my front door. One was Officer Davis, clearly a veteran and the kind of guy who'd seen it all when it came to neighbor drama. The other was Officer Park, younger and more visibly on alert. Out in the driveway, Diana was already in character, trembling, voice cracking, playing the terrified victim with practiced perfection. "Thank God you're here," she told them breathlessly. "This man has been terrorizing our neighborhood. Tonight, he threatened to destroy everything we've built. I'm afraid for our safety." I had to admire the performance. She'd clearly missed her calling in Hollywood. But here's the thing. I'm a retired attorney. I've spent years dealing with manipulators and pathological liars. You don't win with panic, you win with preparation. While Diana was busy performing outside, I calmly got dressed, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and waited. When the officers knocked, I opened the door with a polite smile. "Good morning, officers," I said. "I assumed Diana called about our property disagreement. Would you like some coffee? I have everything documented. This may take a few minutes." The contrast between my collected demeanor and Diana's frantic theatrics couldn't have been clearer. Officer Davis, seasoned and measured, asked me to walk them through my side. I explained everything calmly and precisely the same way I would in court. Then, I brought out my proof. Security footage from 4 different angles showing Diana shouting threats, audio recordings of her demanding illegal fees, certified property deeds proving my legal ownership of the land she was claiming, financial records showing her unauthorized collections going back 2 full years. After reviewing the evidence, Officer Davis nodded slowly. "So, Diana claims this is her property. But you have official documentation that shows otherwise, and she's been charging fees without authority?" "Exactly." While Davis examined the paperwork, Officer Park ran Diana's ID through the system and something strange popped up. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her, "your license shows it was issued just 3 years ago. Do you have any prior ID from a different state?" Diana's face tightened. "I don't see how that's relevant," she snapped. But the shift in her expression said more than her words. Officer Park's suspicion deepened. Just then, my phone buzzed again and I instinctively answered it on speaker. "Mr. Kane?" a deep voice said. "This is Detective Morrison from Jefferson County, Colorado. I understand you've been asking questions about Rebecca Walsh." I looked straight at Diana, her face drained of color like she'd seen a ghost. "Yes, Detective," I said. "I believe she might be here." Using a different name. Diana slowly started backing toward her car, a broken bar. Officer Davis stepped in front of her car door, holding out a hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right here until we get this cleared up." Detective Morrison's voice continued on the phone. "Rebecca Walsh pulled off a similar con in Colorado back in 2019. She claimed to represent a development company, convinced homeowners to hand over funds for fake projects, and vanished the moment the scam unraveled. We still have an active warrant for her arrest." That's when Diana crumbled. All composure gone, she dropped to the ground, sobbing. You don't get it. I needed the money. They would have killed me if I didn't pay back the casino debt. I didn't have a choice. I just needed one big payout to settle everything." Officer Davis's expression hardened, equal parts disbelief and revulsion. "So broken bar you are, Rebecca Walsh?" Diana gave a tearful nod, barely able to breathe. "I just needed the resort plan to go through. Everyone would have profited. It would have transformed this entire place." Through her panic, she spilled everything: her true identity, the crushing gambling debts, how she had already spent advance funds from Sapphire Development, and her plan to vanish right after forcing through the final property sales. Officer Davis formally arrested her for filing a false police report and for identity fraud. Officer Park got on the line with Detective Morrison to coordinate the arrest under the Colorado warrant, but just as they were guiding Diana into the squad car, she twisted around and gave me a look that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Wild-eyed, she screamed, "You have no idea who you are dealing with. You'll never keep that land. There are people with serious power who want it, and they don't care about your family legacy or your paperwork." As the police car drove off with her in the back seat, I stood frozen in my driveway. That they she mentioned it stuck with me. What did she mean by they, and why was she so sure my legal rights didn't matter to them? Later that evening, Eleanor came over. We talked about how the entire community felt relieved that Diana was gone, but deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that we were only scratching the surface of something much darker. Diana's words kept echoing in my mind. "They don't care about your legal documents." That didn't sound like the talk of someone worried about a failed land grab. That sounded like she had backing from something far bigger than a personal scam. What haunted me that night wasn't fear, it was the unknown. Were we dealing with organized crime, or could it be something even more complicated? A government ties, perhaps? In my experience, honest buzzing necessita even aggressive oneza respect ownership laws, but criminals in certain federal entities, they play by a different rulebook. For them, deeds and titles are just paper in the way of power. So, who exactly had Diana been working for, and how far would they go to claim what they believed was theirs? Right as they finished booking Diana, she turned and shouted something that hit me like a punch. "You have no idea who you're messing with. They will never let you keep this land." Who were they? And more chillingly, what did Diana know about this property that even I didn't? Because if there's one thing I've learned from my years as a lawyer, it's this: whenever a con artist starts hinting at powerful, shadowy figures who don't care about the law, you'd better prepare for a storm. And Drama-nest viewers, you all have sharp instincts. Drop your theories in the comments. Who do you think they are? And why does Diana still believe she has power even in cuffs? I thought it was over. Diana was exposed, arrested, the neighborhood safe again. But I'd badly underestimated how deep this rabbit hole went, or how dangerous people become when $50 million is up for grabs. 3 days after her arrest, I got a certified envelope that made my stomach drop. Somehow, she'd made bail, and now, she had retained Marcus Webber, one of the most high-powered white-collar defense lawyers in the entire state. She was suing me. $2 million, civil suit. Filed immediately. The accusations? Wild and stacked. Defamation because I called her a criminal publicly. Harassment for digging into her past. Intentional disruption of business relations. And, perhaps the most absurd, conspiracy to commit fraud by allegedly sabotaging her legitimate resort venture. Within hours, the local news stations were all over the story. Property dispute explodes into $2 million lawsuit blared across screens. And somehow, Diana had flipped the entire narrative via painting me as the villain. Diana was now painting herself as a helpless community champion being attacked by a spiteful wealthy man with a personal grudge. From her attorney's office, she delivered polished interviews, playing the victim with such theatrical talent she could have won an Oscar. She spoke about her supposed years of community work and how she was now being subjected to harassment and unfounded allegations. I watched her performance with a mix of disbelief and revulsion, and the way she could twist the truth to sway public sympathy was chilling. The worst part? It worked on some people. Fearful about declining property values and mounting legal bills, a few neighbors started to second-guess everything. Eleanor remained loyal, bless her soul, but I could see uncertainty creeping into others' faces. The elderly Coopers were terrified the lawsuit would devastate their home's value. Even Thomas Martinez, who had personally witnessed Diana's dramatic confession, looked anxious about getting entangled in a legal battle between two powerful forces. When we arrived at the courthouse for the first hearing, Diana's attorney, Marcus Webb, came out swinging. He painted her as a devoted neighborhood volunteer who had made a few small mistakes but was now facing total ruin due to my so-called vendetta. Your Honor, he began with practiced outrage, my client has given so much to this community only to be relentlessly targeted by Mr. Kane. He hired private investigators to dig into her past, spread lies about her identity, and tarnish her name. This is an abuse of power, plain and simple, by someone who thinks money and legal knowledge allow him to destroy anyone who gets in his way. Then I made an error that nearly cost me everything. During cross-examination, Webb led me straight into a trap. He got me to admit that I had hired a private investigator to look into Diana before she had ever reached out to me. So, you were digging into my client's background before she even introduced herself? He asked, grinning like a hunter who had just cornered his prey. I tried to clarify that I always do background checks when I'm dealing with property disputes, especially involving inherited land, but he wouldn't let up. But you specifically looked into her, ran criminal background checks and personal history, right? He pressed. I answered honestly, yes, I had. I started noticing inconsistencies, so I dug deeper. That was all Webb needed. So you admit to stalking and investigating her without any legal grounds, based solely on your suspicions? He boomed, turning to the judge. For the first time since this ordeal began, I looked vulnerably like the aggressor. I noticed a shift in the room. Some journalists in the courtroom began scribbling faster. A few spectators glanced at me with suspicion. Even Eleanor's eyes narrowed, clearly disturbed by the revelation. Webb had masterfully reshaped the narrative. Now I looked like the paranoid, obsessive rich guy with too much time and power. I noticed Diana lean toward Webb and whisper something. They both exchanged smug, knowing smirks. For a brief moment, I worried they were right, that they might actually win. During recess, I stepped outside and made a phone call I'd been dreading. Mr. Patterson, this is Alex Kane. Is everything prepared for tomorrow's hearing? The voice on the other end belonged to the county historian, a man who had been quietly helping me trace the origins of my family's connection to Clearwater County. All the paperwork is authenticated and filed with the clerk's office, he assured me. Alex, your great-grandfather's insight was exceptional. I just hope this is enough. So do I replied. Let's hope the court sees the full picture. The next day's hearing was supposed to be Webb's closing statement, and he arrived with all the confidence of someone expecting a massive win. Your Honor, he began dramatically, Mr. Kane embodies everything wrong with unchecked privilege in America. He believes owning land gives him the power to silence, intimidate, and ruin the lives of those he deems unworthy. My client may have had struggles in her past, who among us hasn't, but she does not deserve to be destroyed by a man waging a personal crusade. From where I sat, I could see Diana beaming, her satisfaction radiating as Webb continued to portray me as a privileged tyrant. The judge seemed to be listening carefully. Things didn't look good. Then the judge turned to me. Mr. Kane, do you have anything to add before I rule? I rose slowly. Yes, Your Honor. There's a vital element of this case we haven't yet discussed. The judge raised an eyebrow. And what would that be, Mr. Kane? I opened a leather folder and carefully pulled out documents that had been in my family for generations. The question isn't just whether I legally own the land, Your Honor. The question is why my family was granted this land and the duties that came with it. I handed over a copy of the original 1889 land grant, along with the founding charter of Clearwater County. This document shows that my great-grandfather, Samuel Kane, was appointed the county's first commissioner. The charter which he helped author granted our family oversight of major land developments, to safeguard the natural beauty and integrity of the area. The judge studied the records with interest. Webb and Diana were visibly rattled. She leaned in, whispering rapidly, while Webb stared at the papers in disbelief. Your Honor, I said calmly, these aren't just old papers. They're binding, foundational documents that define who is allowed to approve developments in this county and under what conditions. a broken bar, which means that any development project exceeding $10 million requires written authorization from a direct descendant of the Kane family, I explained. It's clearly stated in Section 7.3 of the county charter. This provision had never been removed or challenged because, up until now, my family had always supported community-minded development. The judge turned to the county clerk for confirmation. After reviewing the documents, she verified that everything was authentic and that the clause still existed in the current county charter. Webb's smug confidence instantly vanished. Even if Diana somehow managed to win her lawsuit, the massive resort deal she was banking on was finished unless I approved it. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone in the courtroom, Diana stood and requested permission to address the judge directly. With wild desperation in her eyes, she declared, "Your Honor, there's something the court needs to know about Mr. Kane's land. Part of his property was designated as a strategic mineral reserve by the federal government back in 1987. If he blocks this development, the federal government might seize the land under eminent domain." My stomach turned. That wasn't supposed to be public information. The fact that Diana had that detail meant that whoever she was working with wasn't just wealthy, they were powerful and connected to classified federal systems. And then it happened. Diana fainted right there in the courtroom. As she was being loaded onto a stretcher, she whispered something to Webb. Whatever it was, his face went pale as a ghost. He rushed outside and began frantically making calls. For the first time during this entire ordeal, I felt true fear. What had she said to him? And why did it feel like I was no longer fighting a local grifter, but something far more dangerous? Tell me in the comments, do you think Diana had one final move left, or was this truly her end? After that courtroom collapse and Webb's panicked phone calls, I knew it wasn't over. Diana's mention of federal mineral rights wasn't just a bluff, it was something that shouldn't have been known to anyone outside a select few government departments. Someone with serious reach had leaked it to her, and I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Just a week later, I got a phone call from someone identifying himself as Deputy Director Harrison from the Department of the Interior. He wanted to discuss the mineral rights survey on my land. When I told him I had no interest in selling, his tone dropped ice cold. "This isn't about a sale, Mr. Kane. It's a matter of national security." But before I could even begin navigating that federal nightmare, Diana tried one last, desperate move and it blew up in her face. While still out on bail and under federal investigation, she attempted to flee the county. She had $800,000 in cash on her, and evidence showed she'd been skimming from several overlapping development deals across different states. They caught her at the regional airport. She had a fake passport and nearly $1 million worth of cashier's checks. Federal agents arrested her on the spot. The TV news exploded with coverage. "Local woman arrested in multi-state fraud ring," blared the headlines, accompanied by footage of Diana in handcuffs and investigators removing box after box of evidence from her rental home. Once the truth of her crimes surfaced, the trial didn't drag on. Faced with mountains of evidence and a lengthy list of charges: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, identity theft, Diana pled guilty. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison, ordered her to pay $1.2 million in restitution to victims across several states, and banned her permanently from any real estate or property management activities. But she didn't go down alone. Several top executives from Sapphire Development were indicted on bribery and conspiracy charges. 2 sheriff's deputies, who had been paid off to ignore resident complaints about Diana's misconduct, were also charged and disciplined. With Diana finally removed for good, I was able to help rebuild. This time, the homeowners formed a legitimate, transparent association, one that truly served the people rather than exploiting them. Eleanor, bless her, was unanimously elected president. With full financial oversight and community trust, she began helping residents restore what had been broken. Thomas Martinez Wassa, we hired him as a paid maintenance contractor with a clear scope of duties and reasonable pay. Meanwhile, the elderly Cooper couple continued in their cherished roles as community elders, offering wisdom and continuity. One of the most satisfying outcomes was seeing property values surge by 15% within just 6 months, thanks to stable, transparent management and the elimination of Diana's shady fees and arbitrary penalties. I used the authority granted by the county charter to permanently shield the lake from harmful commercial development, while still allowing reasonable enhancements that benefited everyone. We created a conservation easement that preserved local wildlife habitats, opened public areas for fishing and recreation, drew in visitors, and boosted revenue. With funds recovered from Diana's fraudulent schemes, we launched a comprehensive lake cleanup initiative. The results were almost immediate. Native fish species began returning for the first time in years, and the water quality improved dramatically after halting the illegal dumping Diana had permitted in exchange for bribes. But the most meaningful discovery came half a year later. While I was going through my late father's belongings, I came across a sealed envelope marked, "For Alex. Open only if the property is ever in danger." Inside was a letter dated 1 year before his death that laid out everything I needed to understand why this land mattered so deeply and why powerful people would never stop trying to seize it. "Son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means someone has tried to take our family land, by legal or underhanded means." What I'd uncovered about the county charter, he wrote, was only part of a much larger truth he'd been guarding for decades. The letter confirmed that the federal mineral classification Diana had referenced was indeed legitimate. Government geologists had discovered rare earth minerals beneath our land back in 1987, resources potentially worth hundreds of millions. They'd been waiting patiently, trying to acquire it through eminent domain or coercion. "But your great-grandfather's county charter clause," he warned, "is our only true protection. Guard it with your life, because our family's duty isn't just to own this land, it's to protect it for generations who won't be able to protect it themselves. Trust carefully. And always remember, sometimes the best way to keep something safe is by sharing it with those who love it just as much as you do." Just a week after reading his letter, I got a call from the Department of the Interior. They wanted permission to conduct a national security survey on our land. I respectfully declined, citing the charter provision that required community approval for any government activity on the property. The deputy director didn't take it well, but he couldn't argue with a legal document that predated federal mining laws by several decades. "Mr. Kane," he said through clenched teeth, "you're interfering with matters of national importance. This could have serious consequences." I calmly replied, "Sir, I'm defending my family's legacy and my community's future, and that's what I consider important. Have a good day." That was when it truly sank in. Diana had just been the tip of the iceberg. The bigger threat was a web of government agencies, private mining corporations, and corrupt officials all targeting my property because of the fortune buried beneath it. But thanks to my father's foresight, I was ready. I donated the development rights to a conservation trust while keeping ownership to preserve our legal protection under the charter. I set up a legal defense fund to resist future attempts at takeover, and documented everything to safeguard future generations of our family. Within a year, the change across our community was nothing short of extraordinary. We had 12 families living peacefully under a transparent, homeowner-focused association. The lake was teeming with life again. The water sparkled, and our annual festival had become a local highlight that brought in visitors and economic vitality. Home values had stabilized, and for the first time since Diana darkened our doorstep, every resident felt safe in their home. Then came the final twist. I received a letter from the federal prison where Diana was serving time. Apparently, she'd seen news coverage of our lake festival from behind bars. In what I can only assume was a moment of genuine regret, she wrote to apologize for the harm she'd caused. "I know you'll probably never forgive me," she wrote, "but seeing how beautiful and peaceful the lake is now, it made me realize what I almost destroyed. I spent so many years running from my problems, I forgot what it meant to build something worth keeping." I never wrote her back, but I kept the letter, as a reminder that even broken people can recognize right from wrong. That could have been the end of the story. Justice had been served, and the community had recovered. But the more I sifted through my father's papers, the deeper I dug into a hidden history. I found years of correspondence with government officials stretching back to the 1970s. They detailed how, for decades, Various federal agencies had tried to pressure both my father and grandfather into selling off mineral rights, offering outrageous sums and eventually veiled threats of seizure. But the most incredible part of this legacy, every single generation of my family had chosen protection over profit. Even when money was tight, even under political pressure, even during war and recession, my great-grandfather had embedded the county charter clause to protect the land's future. My grandfather resisted offers during the Great Depression when we were struggling. My father held firm during the 1970s when rare earths became essential for military tech. Now it was my turn, and I finally understood why my father had kept this legacy under wraps. Because secrecy had been our strongest shield. If these forces ever learned how we were protected, they'd find loopholes to exploit. But they never did. And that's why the land still stands. My father also kept journals of painfully detailed accounts of every threat we'd faced, every bribe, every veiled threat. But he didn't just write about us. He wrote about the towns that lost, communities that had been bulldozed, tricked, intimidated into surrendering land they couldn't afford to protect. Quietly, he had helped fund legal defenses for other rural communities, all while keeping our story hidden until the right time came. That waited the realization that our family's actions could ripple beyond our land finally made sense of my father's caution. It wasn't paranoia, it was purpose. Now, as I sit on the dock of Clearwater Lake, watching kids splashing clear water, I realized Diana wasn't our greatest threat. She was just the latest chapter in a much longer battle. But the difference is, we were prepared. We built something stronger than greed, more lasting than corruption. Our lake is safe. Our homes are secure. Our legacy endures. Diana wanted this land for money. I inherited it to protect the people who live here. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, it's showing them they never had power over you to begin with. Because real strength, it comes from protecting what you love. That's not revenge. That's a lifelong mission, one I'm proud to continue. Yes, the federal government still occasionally calls, asking about mineral rights. Developers still send offers I'll never consider. And I'm sure another Diana Foster is out there scouting for vulnerable towns to exploit. But now I understand. This isn't just about land ownership, it's about guardianship, of something priceless. So the next time someone tries to intimidate you into giving up what's yours, remember, they might be the one who should be afraid. Diana thought she could bully me, but she never took the time to understand who she was messing with. The truth always comes out, and karma always comes calling. If this story taught you anything about standing up for your rights or protecting your community, hit that like button. Help more people learn how to fight back against injustice. Here at Andromeda, we believe everyone deserves to understand how these schemes work so they can protect what matters most. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video, where we dive into another powerful story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about power, corruption, and justice. Real people, real drama, really unbelievable. Click like, hit subscribe, and stick around because there's always more to uncover on Andromeda.